We are looking forward our way from Studio C in the 511 studios in the Brewery District, just south of downtown Columbus, Ohio. Hi, this is Brett. Many seniors continue working because they want to. However, others work because they have to. There was a recent report detailing the state of retirement stability in the U.S. Less than 1/3 of the retirees surveyed reported they had any retirement savings. Think of that. 1/3 weren't prepared. They had nothing. And then less than 25% had reached the level of savings they hoped to have by the time they retired. Well, today we're going to discuss how adults, both young and old, can take the necessary steps to reach financial stability in retirement. Let's welcome Benjamin Hoeger. He is the Director of Private Wealth Management at Robert W. Baird & Company. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me in today. I'm excited to be here. I think this is going to be a great discussion, great topics, very timely, right?
Yeah. When isn't it?
Right.
I mean, honestly, because
Absolutely.
it's
timeless topics.
It is. Yeah.
Absolutely. But thank you so much, Ben, for joining us today. And I was really lucky to have parents who were good managers of their finances. Many don't learn those lessons. Yeah. All of the folks that Brett just talked about that don't have any retirement savings. My mother was always on top of like, did you do this? Did you do that? Even as I was beginning my adult years. When you don't have those lessons, you can't gain that knowledge to move onto the right path. You have to find the resources that are going to help you. We have lots to cover today. It's going to be a great discussion, but let's hear a little bit more about your background and what brought you to Baird.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. So, I've been in this some role of family wealth management for coming up on around 20 years. Starting as an intern with my now business partner, Jeff Headley. So he and I started almost 20 years ago, and he would have an incredible funny story probably to share with us here today about when I walked in to interview with him as an intern in college. It was probably an oversized suit from my dad. I mean, probably looked ridiculous.
And which school were you at?
I was at Otterbein.
Otterbein University. Go Cards.
Right?
Exactly.
Right? I wish I could shove "the" in front of that, but
I know.
I can't trademark that.
I know. Yes, audience. Yes, Brett has fits with me because I'm always bringing my Otterbein folks on. But hey,
it's okay.
It's all right.
It's all right.
They're brilliant. That's why.
They're experts in their field, so we'll go with it.
We got a great group coming out of there. So that's where it all started over 20 years ago, and the last 15 years I've been partners with Jeff at Baird. So actually this past February, we just celebrated our 15th year at Baird. At the point right now, we have 6 people on our team. So we've really grown over that time. It started as a three-person team 15 years ago, and now we have 6 folks on our team. Recently added a gentleman from Ohio University and a couple other folks. And so we continue to grow, serve about 350 families across the country. So we tend to spread ourselves out a little bit and navigate across the country as folks move, right? And that's usually how that stuff comes about. Yeah. But been in various roles over those years, but the last 15 has been specifically dedicated to what we're here to talk about today, which is helping families and individuals with their finances, right? So over that time, again, several different roles, but being here at Baird, what has been so phenomenal about this is there's a lot of unique things about Baird, but more than anything, and we actually just got our recent accolade of being on the Forbes greatest companies to work for again, and we've been on a really lengthy streak there of hitting that list. And if you would ask, I think anybody at Baird what it is that makes us unique, that we keep hitting that list, it's really our culture and the fact that you really feel like you're a part of a family when you're with Baird. I mean, it's this absolutely phenomenal environment to be at. And ultimately, that all funnels down to the families that we work with, because ultimately that's creating much better outcomes for them. Being privately owned, employee owned, we're able to look much further into the future and make significant investments that ultimately help all the folks that we work with. So it's not even just about us and having a great environment for us to work at. It's creating better outcomes for people. So we're truly blessed to be there.
And one of the things that sort of just hit me, and it's because I'm always listening when people talk internships. It's so important for young people to get professional development. I'm guessing that it's not often that a young intern can immediately get into a position in a company that they're going to be there for a long period of time, that internship was so successful and important to their career projection. So I think that's our audience tends to be mostly older adults, but if you've got kids and grandkids, it's an important lesson for you to give to them, that professional development as a young person could literally mean your career going forward.
Oh, absolutely. I had an economic professor at Otterbein, and he would always preach that your internship, you should be gaining something from that you take back to the classroom, and what you're learning in the classroom, you should be taking to your internship, and there should be this great relationship both ways. And, I latched onto that idea. And Jeff, over so many years, has been so phenomenal in nurturing the education that I have, and along with several other folks that have really been incredible mentors along the way to me that I owe so much to. But it's just been a phenomenal opportunity. And like you said, it started from something I never would have guessed it would have been what it is today.
Exactly.
But, wow. Well, as in every project we begin, a plan is essential, but it's not always easy to create a financial plan. What is the saying? You've fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Right.
I guess.
That's
and,
true.
I guess there is some truism to that. So are we ever too old or too young to create a financial plan? Realizing that the expectations will likely change over time. Why is a plan so important? And how can we ensure the plan is flexible enough to pivot as needed, especially if you start at, let's say, 25, your needs are much different than 35. Just 10 years, 35, 45, 55, it continues to evolve.
Yeah, so absolutely. So one, we're never too old or too young to start preparing, right? And that's really how I think about this plan. It's the fact that you're putting in time and effort to prepare for something, right? There's obvious advantages to getting started sooner in life, but at the end of the day, I'm going to use a golf analogy, and I shared with you my golf experience. I'm going to bring this in here in a second, but there aren't many mulligans in life, right? And so having a plan that can give you some kind of guide of saying, if I detour off of here, how am I going to get myself back onto track, right? So I was sharing with you all earlier that I was fortunate to go down and see the practice round at the Masters, and I was standing with a gentleman that great friend of mine, and we were watching, and this is a practice round, and we saw Tiger Woods off on the 15th green, and he honestly probably stood there and hit chip shots from just about every possible area for a solid 20, 30 minutes. And this is a man that is an incredible golfer, right? And you see the work that he puts in on a course that he's already played so many times. And it stuck out to both of us being business leaders in the fact that the amount of preparation someone puts in is equal to what they're expecting to do on the back end, right?
Right.
And so I think this, that kind of speaks to me, and it stood out as I was thinking about some of the things we're going to talk about here today, that preparation, that planning is going to be equal to the outcome that you achieve ultimately. Right. Right. And so without that plan, regardless of if it's old, young, et cetera, without that plan, how do you know if you're on track? How do you know if you're okay? Right. Other than maybe a gut feeling. And, for a lot of folks, we bring this back to a very basic question a lot of times. Finances and everything can be very overwhelming and can create anxiety for a lot of folks, right? It's why so many people just don't talk about this on a regular basis. I'm reading a book right now called Geometry of Wealth by Brian Portnoy. And he talks about this idea that with your friends, colleagues, et cetera, you'll know about their marriage, you'll know about their health, some very intimate details, right? You never talk about money. Right. People just don't talk about it.
It's amazing how that's become, I don't want to call it taboo, but it kind of is. You just don't talk about money. Don't talk about money. Like it's almost that to be embarrassed by what you do or don't know. Or
absolutely.
I guess. And I think what you just said, it goes back to that. It can be complicated. It can be, or it's just anxiety driven.
and it can be messy, right? Finances are messy. I think a lot of people are searching for one exact answer, right? Yeah. Everybody wants clarity and certainty. And the reality is the sooner that we can wrap our mind around the fact that there's not much certainty in this idea of finances, right? There's not a ton of clarity. It's a very gray world. The sooner we can wrap our minds around that emotional aspect and the behavior aspect of money, I think the sooner that we can make really good decisions as we move forward.
I would think the certainty is that if you don't do something, you won't have anything. Right. I mean, there is a certainty to that. Right. But at least go at it intelligently.
Right.
Absolutely.
The analogy as a career counselor, students, older adults would come up to me and say, well, show me what a perfect resume looks like. Well, there is no perfect resume. No. There is a wonderful opportunity to look and see who you are and what you've done and what your skills are and strengths and all of that. And it's the same thing with creating a financial plan. Yes, it's messy, but if you actually put it down on paper, it's going to be a lot clearer and a lot more structured than you realize that it probably is. But because it's just all floating, all those little bits and pieces are floating in your head, it doesn't seem like there's any structure to it. So that brings me right into my question. We need to create this retirement financial plan. I'm going to assume that the first step is to look at our current financial status. We need to know what we have, then determine what we want and how we're going to get there. What do you tell your clients about this plan, its role and importance, what they should include? Maybe there are things they don't have to include. And can you incorporate both those short and long-term goals? Because that's really different than just putting a list of accounts down. And we're going to talk about resources throughout this podcast. But, anytime there are resources out there, that's what we really want to get to our folks too.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of things to unpack there, right? And one thing I would start with, and here's where maybe our thoughts of how you go about this planning process might be a little bit different than what maybe your average experience with an advisor might be, and I think that's where. Honestly, we're at a bit of a tipping point, I think, in our industry, where how we think about goals versus purpose is starting to evolve a bit, right? So, go back 20, 30 years ago, and our industry was all about basically a broker's business. In other words, let's call it similar to real estate. You're buying and selling, you're transacting, right? And then it started to evolve as folks needed more planning around specific goals. Right. But it was usually specific goals. I want to buy this beach house. I want to retire by 65, whatever those things are. Right. But there are defined goals. And as we continue to push forward, I think what we see changing is this idea of having this purpose or vision. And the reason that we're starting to dig deeper and kind of peel back those layers and we want to understand the purpose and the vision. I could give you a great story here to kind of weave into how we think about this and why you should start with the purpose as you go about this planning goal. If you were to go and say, hey, one of my goals are I want to buy this beach house, great. If we were to just document that and say, okay, we got to strive towards that, we got to save, et cetera, we have some kind of quantifiable thing that we're shooting for. But you asked earlier, Brett, about, as things change, how does that plan evolve and change? And, to come back to that, the one thing that we are uncertain about, I've never met a person that says, this is how I expected my life to go, and it went exactly that way, right?
Don't we all?
I've never met someone that said everything played out exactly as I thought it would over close, 40, right. 50, 60 plus years, right? So the reality is we know those things are going to change, but so those goals might have to change. Your financial resources might have to change. But maybe if we were to think of our purpose as our North Star, that's what's always going to bring us back. So to bring us back to this conversation of I want to own a beach house, or I want to own a second vacation home. If you really get at the heart of what that is, and you keep peeling back layers and asking why, not in a challenging way, but just trying to understand why, it might sound something like, well, I want to spend time with my family. Okay, what about spending time with the family at that beach house? Well, that's where I grew up and I did that, right? Amazing, that's great. Tell me more. Well, I had such great memories. I want to share that with my kids. Okay, we're getting somewhere, right? What's really important to you is not that beach house in North Carolina. What's important to you is the fact that you had such great memories growing up and you want to be able to build those same memories with your family. So now suddenly, as time passes, your financial resources change, whatever it might change about your life, where suddenly that might just not be in the picture to get that. So what do we come back to? Our North Star was you wanted to create memories and time, ultimately, with that relationship, that very important relationship with your kids, grandkids, et cetera. So how can we recreate that, right? That ultimately is our goal. In my mind, that's ultimately our goal. It's not necessarily to own that beach house. And so if we're able to get at the heart of that, I feel like we as a team, in particular, our group at Baird, we're able to do a great job to really help you really reach this idea of wealth, which, that book I was just referencing, Geometry of Wealth, he talks a lot about being rich versus wealthy. And wealthy is kind of this idea of this funded contentment, right? I'm happy, I'm fulfilled. Rich is you're chasing goods and more stuff. but the idea of being fulfilled from that is kind of fleeting, right? And so, once you get through that big first goal of I got to get this idea of this purpose, what's my North Star? I think that's when you can start to get a little bit more granular about what those goals look like. What are the financial resources? Sometimes I tell people it's kind of the getting organized meeting, right? Again, we have so much stuff going on. You can be spread out from prior jobs. You got old retirement plans here, there. You got different, you got a life insurance policy you took out when you were 25 and you forgot about it. It's getting organized and getting all that stuff down in one place. So we really start to understand how can we connect the dots again, between purpose and plan and resources, right? There's multiple layers here that we got to make sure we're connecting, ultimately trying to make this so much more meaningful to you and your family is our objective.
And so many of us started, our financial plan, really it was more of a budget.
Absolutely.
It was more of like, I need to figure out what income I have and where I'm throwing it, where it's going, not just to things, but to what accounts, and do I have a savings account or a retirement account? And so if you can pull all that together, actually your estate, quote unquote, is probably a lot larger than you realized.
Oftentimes
if you
it
get
is.
it onto paper. Yeah.
Oftentimes it is. Absolutely. It's much more than I think people realize. I think the other thing that you point out there, when you start to pull those resources together, you might understand that to your point, you're on a better track than you thought, and those goals and that purpose might start to evolve. Again, that's this idea that this is a never-ending project, right? A plan. It's a snapshot in time. I tell people all this time when they meet with us and they think this plan is like, it's like this document that you do this once and it's like the Rosetta Stone and we're done, right?
Like a resume, it's not done undone.
No, it is never done, is my experience. I always tell people we're in a constant state of draft, right? We're in a constant state of draft because tomorrow you could call me and tell me something completely changed in your life, right? Absolutely completely changed. And we got to continue to roll with those punches over time.
Yeah. Well, and that leads to what we want to talk about next, even, from an individual or a couple standpoint, you're creating that financial plan. The eventual step is to leave full-time employment for a different or new lifestyle. Part of the planning is to project what they would like to do, like travel or move to a new location. How can the plan help them determine the income level they need to reach those long-term goals, projecting costs years or maybe decades in the future? What did I hear just recently that, you can retire now comfortably at $1.5 million or something like that. And I saw that number going, that's a meaningless number when you don't put all the factors we just talked about into play.
Well, and $1 million today is nothing compared to what you would need 20 years from now. $1 million doesn't.
Yeah. Or it could be well more than enough if you have a lifestyle that's just, we just want to take small vacations and just, hang out. I mean, it's that, okay, now we're ready. And now, it is a different look at it, and maybe, address that.
Yeah, so absolutely. So one thing that I'll always start with, people ask me this all the time. We sit down and it's always great. I'll meet a family for the first time and they're so gracious about sharing everything. And again, this is a moment of, them just sharing their life and putting it out there. And we talked earlier about how this is uncomfortable, right? And so very gracious about sharing this. And then they'll look at me and they'll say, so do you think I'm okay? How am I doing compared to my neighbor or my peers?
Yes.
And
yes.
And I always hit them with the same line every time. And I say, I think it's going to take me time to get back to you and let you know about your specific situation. And here's the reason why. There will be folks we work with that have millions and millions of dollars, and I'm worried about them every day. And then there's folks that have a couple $100,000, and I'm not worried about them for a second because they're going to be perfectly fine. It's all about what is your life. Yeah. So that idea of that dollar amount, people are aiming for this dollar amount. Does that dollar amount mean anything? Well, that dollar amount, it can mean something completely different from one family to the other. It's all about what that lifestyle is. So a lot of times, to your question here, Brett, we always want to start with what's your life look like today, and start to get back to the idea of purpose and vision. I think of athletes. again, not to beat on this golf analogy, but hey, we're in Masters Week, so why not, right?
Exactly.
So, you hear from these, amazing golfers, and you tell them, and you'll even watch them when they go to hit a shot, and you can see that they're envisioning where they think this thing's going to go, the shape of it, everything, right? And this comes from a lot of, great athletic psychologists, that you got to envision what you're about to do, right?
Right.
And so, one of the conversations we like to spend quite a bit of time on, especially for folks that are at this moment in time that they're going to transition to retirement. What does this look like for you? I literally, before I came down here and hopped on this with you all, I had a great conversation, wonderful woman we work with out in Pennsylvania, just phenomenal lady. And she said, I want to move to, I want to move further south. And I was like, oh, just warm weather, or what is it? And she said, I've always had this vision of me sitting on the beach with my toes in the sand. I'm like, there's an image.
Yeah.
And we got to hold on to it, right?
Yeah.
And I tell everyone, and here's the importance of this purpose and vision and holding on to this versus goals, that it starts to feel like you're just chasing this goal over time. We were talking earlier about this being an election year, and that can create certain emotions when it comes to your money, right? And I think it's important to understand that there's so much news. We're just inundated with news and information. And I tell people a lot of times, a lot of this stuff day to day is noise. It's like you're on a radio dial and you're between stations and you're getting the scramble, right? And that noise can confuse us from what our ultimate mission is here, right? But if we have that vision that we can keep coming back to, the second someone calls and says, well, don't you think we should change this or that? Do you still want to see yourself sitting on the beach with toes in the sand? Yes. Has anything changed? No. Then why are we changing our plan, right? It gives us that anchor point that we can always come back to, ultimately, making sure that we're lining up our purpose, our plan, and how our resources are aligned to get us in that direction, ultimately.
Yeah, because a lot of it is retirees don't even know what they want to do once they retire. I mean, you've worked all your life, and all of a sudden the next day you're not going into work.
Right.
And you've not made a plan to retire. So it's almost, this is kind of helping you bridge that gap to a certain, to make you think about it. What's your life going to be like when you're not working?
Well, and also
do you want to
gives
volunteer? Do you want to do da-da-da-da-da? It makes you think.
Right. And it gives you the resources that you can step out of employment and do some fun kinds of things.
So we talk a lot about this idea. One of the things that kind of creates a little bit of like mini panic for me when I see this, when we're sitting down and chatting with someone, and I'll say, well, when you're trying to retire, what does this mean to you? And they're like, well, I got to get away from my work. It's killing me, right? And that tells me they are not retiring to something, they're retiring away from something. Right. Retiring away from something is our biggest fear, and this is where we've really started to turn the script upside down and say, we need to make sure we have another resource around life planning that is really built around this idea of understanding what your purpose is and what drives you day to day. Because for a lot of folks, their work is their identity. And when they walk away from that, what we've seen and why our team specifically have started to, go down this route, invest a lot of resources behind it, ultimately trying to support the families that we work with, is because we've seen folks use money as they're chasing this fulfillment, right? And as opposed to this idea of, if you're kind of covering all, kind of four legs of the stool, if we were thinking about it that way, around purpose, relationships, your health, and your finances, that's how we really look at retirement. And you got to have all four to really feel like you're getting that fulfilling retirement. And if you start to miss any of those pieces, we tend to see folks making a little bit more erratic decisions.
Right. And often even continue working, even if it is killing them, because they're afraid to walk to nothing. 100%. Because that's what they see it. It's an as or either or.
Yep.
I'm either working or I'm retired, and that's and there are lots of pieces in between that. 100%. Needless to say,
and ultimately everybody is looking for a little bit more freedom and time, right? That's what everybody is looking for.
Oh, absolutely.
Even if it comes down to the job is killing me, I want the freedom of time so it's not killing me.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and we've done lots of discussions with individuals who, it's not that they want to leave the work world, they just want a more flexible schedule. That's how I am.
100%.
I'm willing to do these podcasts, just not at 8:00 in the morning, Brett.
I've never asked her to do that either.
Exactly. Well, he can ask all he wants, but I'm not showing up.
It's
no.
not happening. Yeah.
So when we're looking at these plans, and linking them to retirement, it sounds like something you start when you're 40s and 50s. In actuality, I talk to my young cousins and I'm like, you're 20. You need to think about this now. They can't even imagine what retirement would be 40, 50 years down the line. But it really never is too early to plan, because it's never too early to start to save. That notion of compounding interest and wealth building comes with decades, not just a few years. But it's difficult for a 20-something. Even for those who are, in their early 30s, it's probably difficult. How do you guide younger clients to begin? And then how do you guide those clients as they hit those decade time periods?
Yeah. So Carol, you hit on something earlier about yourself with your parents and kind of your experience of coming up around money, right? Our experiences throughout our life, whether it be our friends, colleagues, or family, it's going to shape a lot of the ways that we make decisions as we move through life, right? And so when we start talking with someone in their 20s, 30s, whatever it might be, I want to spend a decent amount of time understanding some of that, right? What's their financial background? Not like saying, can you tell me what a stock or bond is? That's irrelevant, right? Mm-hmm. It's me getting a grasp for how are you going to act and how are you going to make decisions around money ultimately, right? Because to your point, I can't ask them, hey, have you thought about retirement? No, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to eat this afternoon, right? Or how I'm going to
my career's going to be.
Yeah, how I'm going to put gas in my car or whatever it might be. Their line of sight is so much shorter at that point of their life. And so again, this is where we would come back to understanding what drives them about money, right? Mm-hmm. What's important to you about money. And here's where sometimes you'll get some of this info of, I saw my parents struggle, or I saw someone do really, really well, and gosh, that looks easy. It's like, okay, so depending on, I saw parents struggle, maybe that will create an environment that they're going to work really hard because money is security to them, and they saw someone not have security. Other folks where they feel like they saw as if money was easy and it was just spent, we got a different conversation on our hands. So me understanding some of that background starts to really set the stage for how are we going to talk moving forward with this person, and start to understand this concept of what is money to them, right? What is money to them? And ultimately, I think a lot of people, from all the conversations I've had over time is, money is, I think a lot of people are wrapping their mind around money is not going to give you happiness, but it can avoid pain, right? And I think that's where this, this idea that you want to avoid loss, you want to avoid pain, that's what financial resources are for a lot of people. And so, the sooner you establish that in someone's mind, that's going to move them towards this idea that, look, I got to do something. Do I know that this is going towards retirement someday, or maybe it's a house down payment? I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. It's too far away. That vision is way too cloudy. And, oftentimes when we first start saving, we talk about this is the funnel. And at the top of the funnel, your idea of what you're doing is very wide. But as you move closer and closer towards that timeline or that goal, that vision starts to crystallize. What you're aiming for, what your purpose and goals are, starts to get so much more clear, and we get far more detailed. At this point, we're just saying, let's move ourselves towards some safety and security and start doing some things early on. Because as you said, the idea of compound interest, is everybody's heard, it's the eighth wonder of the world, right? Mm-hmm. And you can have compound interest working for you or against you.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so we're just trying to help people, at that stage of their life, put themselves in a position that they're not going to have to do the heavy lifting when they're 45 or 50 and they're trying to get kids out of the house and into college, and all of a sudden you panic and say, oh shoot, I need to make up for the fact that I didn't start until I was 30, right? Mm-hmm. And here's where I would say that as generations change and evolve, right? As generations change and evolve, money is kind of this taboo idea. A lot of families won't talk about it, but it's starting to become more acceptable to talk about. We try to host what we call family meetings amongst families. If we work with mom and dad, we want to pull in the kids, not to, roll the carpet out and say, let's look at what all mom and dad have, but let's talk about concepts, right? Mm-hmm. Let's start to educate, right, around what did mom and dad go through. You might see mom and dad now and say, wow, you all are very, very successful. do you know where mom and dad came from? Do you know some of the tougher days, right?
Right.
And so the more you can talk about this, it starts to create some really good behaviors. And I think that's where ultimately you work through that, create those good behaviors, and then you start to build the processes. I'm a huge fan of automation. If you take the necessity of making a decision out of the equation, right?
Yeah.
Right.
You just put it in place and let it go,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
You take that necessity of you having to take action to achieve a savings, you're going to put yourself in such a good position over time.
The absolute value of a 401k, or for me, it was 357Bs. It automatically came out of your income before you got your check. You didn't even think about it, and it could stay there. You know, I want to ask one additional piece on this, and especially with young people, it's really hard to get their attention. With my young female cousins, Brett and I were talking about Susie Orman. I always watch Jean Chatzky, just getting them to see there are women who are playing a huge role in people's successful financial status. So if nothing else, I'm sending them information about things that those women are suggesting. One of the things that some of them have, luckily not all of them have, is student debt. How do you get a young person on a plan when all they can think of is paying their rent and student debt and hopefully have enough money to eat?
Right.
And gas in their car.
Yep. Absolutely. And so, you know, here's another plug for where we want to open up this discussion. Again, to relate back to what we do every day, just had this discussion earlier today as well around this idea of let's pull your son into the conversation of trying to get into college. Because if we are going to take on debt, let's help them understand what's happening, right? Let's not just have mom or dad sign them up for this debt, or, you know, gosh, even if mom and dad take on the debt to get them through college, let's understand what the purpose is behind this financing, and what does it mean to you when that day comes. And I think ultimately that's going to pivot to when they walk out of school and now they have this liability that they got to start chopping away at. At least hopefully they can come out of that and not feel any kind of resentment. I've had that conversation with folks. You know, they are adamant about, I will do anything. I am paying for my son or daughter's education before I retire all day long, right? That is their number one priority. And again, we peel back that layer and say, help me understand why, like what's going on. I'm not here to challenge you. Just help me understand why. There's an element of resentment where they went through school, they didn't understand that everything that they were getting themselves into, they walked out and now they have this big liability, and they just say, I'm not doing that. I'm not repeating that. And here's where I could take a step back and say, we all got to understand, we are about one generation into this idea of finances being more of our responsibility as savers and retirees. You got to think back a generation or so. What did most people have? They had a pension and they had Social Security, maybe had a little bit of savings, but that pension and Social Security carried them the bulk of the way.
Right. Healthcare was not the issue that it is today.
You got it. So much has changed and evolved that really this idea that we are responsible for our own retirement, when you state that, the stat early on in the conversation, Brett, why it's not shocking to me is because people are still trying to evolve to this idea that this is my responsibility. This is not my employer's responsibility to get me towards retirement. Obviously, they're trying to set up vehicles that you can do it, but it's still your decision, right? And I think that's where, you know, the power of having some coaches in your life, whether it be advisors, whatever it is, but steering you towards the idea of starting these good behaviors early, right? It's so much easier to start that automatic savings when you get your first job, right? Even though it might be a little painful, but you know, if it's $10 a paycheck, do it, because now you've started that behavior, right? And I tell everyone, one of the greatest things that's a part of any kind of retirement savings or different vehicles, I mean, with banking, there's so many automations you can do and technology these days. You can even automatically increase that savings over time. Right. So as you gradually make more money, you can automate the idea of gradually saving more, right?
That reminds me of the first, I won't call him a financial planner. He was with one of the major companies when IRAs first came out.
Oh, sure.
And having worked at Ohio State, you know, there were limited number of groups that we could work with. So I worked with this gentleman. He knew when I was scheduled to get a pay increase every year.
Oh, yeah.
And he would call and he'd make an appointment and he'd look at me and he goes, how much is your pay increase? And I'd tell him and he goes, how much do you really need? And let's put the rest of it into your IRA. So it just kept giving me the opportunity to build up how much I was putting in. I was contributing to myself.
Right.
But he's like, you haven't been using that money. You don't need it. And I'm like, okay.
and that's the reality of it.
It really is.
All we're here to do, right? As an advisor, a wealth manager, whatever you want to call yourself, all we're here to do is try to create good behaviors that we've seen the data, we've seen the statistics that it shows. If you do these things consistently and you try to tune out a lot of the other noise that we think is important, like watching CNBC or whatever it might be, we think that stuff's important. That stuff's not that important. We got to do the good work every day, just laying one brick at a time. Yeah. It's slow, it's boring. It's not some exciting new investment. It's slow and boring, but you put your head down and you do that. You wake up in however many years, wow. Yeah, I've done it. I've done something. Yeah.
I liked your point about the fact that this is really the first generation where it is less of an employer-based notion of retirement and the ability to retire than what we had in the past. When you think about it, I worked at the university 30 years and ended up with a pension. There are so few people today who can do that, even working in public sector. There are different things that people are having to do. I went to a financial planning workshop yesterday, and there were probably 15, 18 people in the room, and there were only 3 of us that had a pension. So that really, not only are pensions not opportunities that people have, but when you think about it, employers change more now. It used to be where even if you were in private industry, you worked for that employer 20, 25, 30 years, and now people are popping every couple of years. They're changing to a different employer. So those savings vehicles need to be flexible and transferable.
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing that we saw post-COVID, we saw the number of folks registering for a tax ID or an LLC with the state absolutely skyrocketed post-COVID, right? Because if you just had your life turned upside down because you lost your job or whatever, and it was completely out of your control, I think a lot of people looked at themselves and said, well, now I'm going to take this into control myself. But what that does is it puts another layer of pressure on preparing for retirement, because now the employer is not even giving you some kind of structure to make the decision to opt into. Now you have to even decide on what's that structure look like, right? And so it's a whole nother layer of complexity in this kind of gig economy. I mean, it's incredible how you can kind of create your life the way you want to create it. If you want to go out and pursue something, the opportunities are there if you want to do it, but it does put extra pressure around your health care, your retirement savings, all these other things that come along with it that, again, we're here to help people with, but it's not the fun part to talk about. The fun part is what you just invented or you're going to try to go and sell or whatever on this new business venture that you're coming up with.
Right.
There's got to be some costs that should be included in a financial plan, but often are overlooked. What have you noticed is the most difficult for your clients to include? And we're talking costs of moving, like you mentioned. Somebody wanted to go to North Carolina, so have to kind of put that in mind. We all have to be we all have to be concerned about health, but we don't even have a crystal ball for that. We have no idea what we're going to be afflicted with, if anything, after we retire. How do you address those issues?
Yeah, here's the reality. Again, it goes back to a conversation we had earlier in here. Has to be flexible, right? Everything about your plan has to be flexible. My idea is that I want to take many detours. I don't want to fall off the cliff, right? If we have to take many detours along our path of retirement or life, I can deal with that. We can talk through that stuff. What we don't want to have to do is completely do a 180 and head back the other direction, right? And so we assume that, again, let's say an average retirement being almost 30 some years now. Again, we said earlier, who has laid out their plan and said, yep, followed it perfect.
If only.
Right. I tell the story all the time of my wife and I. We have 3 kids within 14 months of each other. And we were hoping for one. I didn't think I was going to get 3 within 14 months, right? But you roll with the punches and you figure out how to evolve your family to deal with this new circumstance, right? And that's what we're here to do and help people with every day. But the big ones, I think a lot of it is around medical. Some things that it hits people out of nowhere, and we try to plan for as much as we can, and we understand we're not going to plan for everything. But it's simple things like you're retired and you're on Medicare. You don't really have dental coverage. Have you ever paid for a root canal in cash?
Oh.
That's not a cheap expense.
Right.
I've had countless retirees come in, even though we try to talk through everything, countless retirees come in and they just lay a dental bill on the desk and say, how are we going to take care of this? Right. And it's shockers like that. But the other things, again, that we're here to chat through with people, and this is kind of that idea of working with someone that can help you pinpoint the areas where you might have blinders, right? Everybody wants to think like, hey, I'm about to retire. I want to get rid of all my major expenses. I want to get my house paid off, assuming that, and that's this assumption that you're never going to move again, right? The reality is, we were talking at the outset of this conversation, people want to put themselves in a position they can age in place, right? And the chances are you going to be in that final home by the time you retire at 60, 65, 70? Not a lot of people are. There's a lot of people that they don't want to move to that, more retirement-based home where their lawn is cut and snow is shoveled and all that stuff. A lot of people aren't there by the time they retire. So there's a transition when you're in retirement. And it's, let's even assume that you have enough money there to pay cash for the home. But I tell you what, I don't know too many 60, 70-year-olds that are picking up washing dryers and moving themselves in retirement. So now you got these other expenses, ancillary expenses that come along with moving. Some outside expenses around medical care. Again, a common one that I hear from folks is, I think I bought my last car. You're going to live for 30 years in retirement. Right. That is not your last car. Right. I guarantee you that's not your last car.
I was saying the same thing. Like, what's my last car going to be? But one of the things I sort of chuckle, Brett was saying earlier, people don't talk about finances. You don't tell people what you have or what type of accounts you have. One of the big questions that everybody is talking about in my cohort are taxes, not the regular, how much am I paying from my income? But when we get to the point of where we have to take money from different accounts, how do you structure that so you pay the least amount of taxes? Some of that has to be structured way ahead of time, Roth IRAs as compared to regular IRAs, that kind of thing. So you're not getting killed in taxes because everyone assumed, well, when you retire, your income goes down. Well, it may not.
Yeah, absolutely. It might not, especially if you followed that traditional track of, I had a corporate job and I saved to my 401k every year, and that was the bulk of all my savings. All you've done is defer that taxable income into the future, and now you got this giant account that's all taxable to you, right? And so.
And forced to have to take part of it.
And forced to take part of it.
Start to embrace the RMDs, required minimum distributions. That's your best friend all of a sudden, or your worst friend.
Worst enemy.
And that's under the assumption that you don't need all of that RMD to begin with, right? And so, everybody in our industry, we preach this idea of diversification around your investments. My other partner, Dominic, and I on the planning side, we preach the idea of diversification on taxes, right? Because we want to have different buckets of money. If you want to pay cash for that car, or you got to repair, a roof or replace your roof, these aren't cheap things in retirement. And we got to remember that there's many domino effects in our taxability of our assets in retirement. It's not just about the taxes paid, but if you start to show too much taxable income via withdrawals because you try to pay cash for a car, repair a roof, whatever it is, and you got to pull it out from a taxable account, well, now you could push yourself into a higher Medicare bracket. Where you're paying higher premiums because you showed too much income.
I've done that, right? That Irma penalties, right?
You got it. You're on it. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like that was an unfortunate conversation. Sorry to bring up a tough subject.
What's always really grating is, you end up with Irma because you've got like $50 over the limit.
Yes. That's an unforgiving one, right?
Exactly.
Our taxes are progressive. So if you barely touch into the next tax bracket, it's not that big of a deal. Irma brackets are.
Oh, yeah.
You're $1 over, you're $1 over.
Right. So, one of the things that I learned in this workshop that I went to the other day was in 2026, the structure of our tax brackets are going to change. So you've definitely got to come back and talk to us about that, Ben. So we'll keep that on our agenda of things to deal with.
Yes, there's a lot coming.
Yeah, we are really going to get hit with that. So. Okay, in terms of 2024, we're well into 2024 at this point in time. What should we be watching for and planning at this time of the year? As you mentioned, it's an election year. Things are going to get a little squirrely. If we realize that there are problems with our plan that we've created, how do we make changes without overcorrecting?
Yep. So a couple of things there that I'd start with. We were just talking about taxes. It's April 11th as we're sitting here. We got tax day coming up here in a few days. Mm-hmm. I think this is a great reminder to say we can't ignore what's going on with our taxes, right? Even if we're still in that accumulation mode. Obviously, if you're in retirement, we got to make sure we're paying attention to that. How are we pulling from different buckets? How are we managing our tax brackets wisely, right? Some folks will go into retirement if they have this non-taxable type bucket, let's just say cash in the bank account. They want to immediately say, well, I'm just going to live off of that and pay no taxes. Again, it's this idea of I don't want to pay taxes. Well, we're wasting some opportunities to use up our lowest tax brackets that today are like 10 and 12%. Why would we not maximize that opportunity when you were probably deferring that income out of your paycheck when you're in the 22 or 24 or even higher tax bracket? Mm-hmm. That is an absolute win. Whenever people ask me, like, what is kind of the purpose of the tax structure of the 401k, it's to get some kind of arbitrage or win of I saved that money when I was paying 22, 24 or higher percent in taxes, and I'm going to hopefully take it out when I'm in a lower tax bracket. But that takes some management, right? And so what we're doing with families we work with is we're always asking to review tax returns and looking through year by year. What has changed? What's evolved, right? Has anything come up that we need to adjust in our withdrawal strategy? Or if you're saving money, are we saving the right places? Again, everybody's natural inclination is, I want to lower my tax bill. So I'm going to save money into my 401k, or if I'm running my own business into a SEP IRA or some structure like that, I'm going to save it in there and try to lower my tax bill. Well, if you're only in the maybe 15, 16% effective tax rate, do you really want to do that? Is that the right idea for you today? Or should we be thinking long-term, like you brought up earlier, Carol? Maybe we're better off putting money in that Roth bucket and saying, I'd rather pay the tax bill today while I'm working and know that when I'm in retirement, now I got this bucket of money over here that's completely tax-free, right? So it's not always that idea of immediate gratification, right? And we talk a lot about that, even for folks as they transition to retirement. We'll talk about an idea of something called Roth conversions, right? So you have all these dollars that were built up pre-tax, and then you got this window of time before, let's say if you retired in your early to mid 60s, you got a window of time, and it keeps getting pushed out to 73 when you have to start taking those required minimum distributions. Mm-hmm. So you got a window of time where your taxes are completely in your hand as far as how much income you're going to realize. So if we can manage your brackets and start doing conversions and keep pushing more money into that Roth IRA in those early retirement years, those are huge wins, right? Those are huge wins. So I would say at this point of 2024, that is, front of mind for us and our team is making sure we're talking to people about their taxes. Did you have a good tax outcome, bad tax outcome? Did we owe more? Did you get put on quarterly taxes because you're way under withheld if you own a business or something like that? Mm-hmm. We got to think through these things and make sure we're preparing for them, right? It's all about preparation and having that plan. The point of this whole conversation today, right? There's and this has been around for a long time, but where it stuck out to me, we had a gentleman, a longtime family we've worked with. He passed away, and his daughter did a tremendous reading, and she said, Dad always preached the idea of the 6 Ps. Proper prior planning prevents pain and panic, right?
Great. I like that.
And so, we think about that all the time. If we're prepared for these things, right, it doesn't feel like as big of a hit out of left field. If we know these things are coming, we've planned for them, we understand this is something we got to deal with, and then we can be ready for it. The other thing I would touch on at this point of 2024, because I do not think it's at all too early, because this stuff takes time. You alluded to this, Carol, we got some changes coming up here at the end of 2025. So all the tax laws that were changed a few years ago, tax brackets, estate tax, multiple things are set to sunset the end of 2025. So effectively what that means is if Congress does nothing, they revert back to where they were. That means that our current estate tax exemption for wealthy families gets cut in half. Right now, we can shelter about 22 million or so. That's going to get cut in half almost, down to about 7 million per person in a spouse situation. So, those kind of things, that can have a drastic change in an outcome for a family. And to start planning on this idea of what does my estate look like? How am I moving dollars around? Am I starting to do gifting to charities, large charitable donations, gifting to family members, getting money out of my estate, if that's something that makes sense for your family? That takes time. And knowing that, this is going to come up the end of 2025, all I can say is I'd hate to be an attorney come probably September, October of 25, because everybody's going to want to talk to them, and I guarantee you it's going to be hard to get in front of them.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Individuals need to work with professionals for something so important as this. Along with the financial plan, there are some other legal documents that an individual should consider, like will, estate, power of attorney, health power of attorney, lots of different things. They may need not only a financial planner, but a lawyer, a tax accountant professional. How can an individual find professionals in those areas and determine their qualifications are going to meet their needs?
Yeah, great question. So a couple of things that our team always does is if a family comes to us and they already have those professionals in their life, right, we immediately want to insert ourselves into that relationship. And we often look at ourselves as kind of the quarterback for that, because the attorney, the CPA, they tend to be a little bit, transactional is not the right word, but you're going to see them only at certain life events, right? Mm-hmm. They're not going to talk to you quite as much as your financial advisor if you're working with an advisor. And so we see our job as we are here to identify when to pull those folks in, right? Mm-hmm. We're not the professionals, we're not the experts. We rely on those experts heavily every day, right? And so we identify when something has come up and we got to pull that person in. So one of the first things we do is if you are already come with those professionals in your life is we want to identify that. We want to introduce ourselves to them and become a part of that. And obviously, if we have concerns about the work that's being done there or the quality, it's our job to speak up, right? And so one is if you're already coming with that in your life, we want to incorporate ourselves in that. And I think that's very important with any advisor relationship. The other thing is if you're working with an advisor and you don't have that, obviously that's the other part. We're saying, hey, we need to work on building out an estate plan. We see some complex stuff going on in your taxes that we need to involve a CPA. This is probably beyond TurboTax at this point in your life, right? We're going to identify that. And what our team does is, obviously we're out networking. We're trying to meet a lot of attorneys and CPAs, and we're going to identify the ones that we think do an exceptional job, right? And so we do our due diligence, find those folks, and we kind of have a deep bench of these folks that we can rely on. And so we'll pull them into their life and say, look, I think this could be a great fit, and then look to explore that with them. The last one that is obvious, but it can't be ignored is just asking around your friends, family, and colleagues, right? Because a lot of times we will be introduced to the folks that we now use on a regular basis, CPAs and attorneys, via the families we work with, because they'll say, oh, my neighbor said they work with this person. Great. Let's set up a time to meet with them. And I'm going to be there with you. So it's not just you trying to vet this person and see, will they do a good job for you? You're going to have another set of eyes that I've sat through countless meetings with attorneys and CPAs, and I can get a quick feel for, are they going to help us or not?
Right. You really do have to vet those individuals closely, yep. Not just because you're literally handing them your life and all of the information about you, which is a scary thing, but also just that you're comfortable working with them and comfortable asking the questions you need to ask.
That's huge right there, Carol. And we talk about this a lot when folks say, how do you have any advice for finding an advisor? And I tell a lot of people at the end of the day, there's just a ton of great folks out there, right? Mm-hmm. I think our team is exceptional, but there's a ton of great teams out there. The reality is you got to find someone you're comfortable with, because hopefully this is a very long relationship and a great partnership that you can build a really close, almost friendship with. And you're not going to do that if it just feels like, oh, he called me for my annual meeting again. I don't want to, gosh, this guy again.
Yeah.
You don't want to feel that way. And if you start to feel that way, you know that you're going down the wrong road.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh gosh, Ben, there's so much to talk about and so many things that we could sit here and go on forever. This has really, really been a valuable discussion, and we hope that all of our listeners today have gotten even one little kernel of advice and information from you. We always ask our guests for any last words of wisdom that they would like to add. Do you have any suggestions or resources or, again, last words of wisdom for our audience?
Yeah, so the main thing I would say is actually my partner Dominic and I, we were traveling yesterday and we were talking about this idea, right? Because there's so much that I could spend a whole topic just talking about just this, right? The different ideas. And so the one that I think is really important is just that general advice of just never stop learning and understanding that in finances, you are your own best advocate. nobody's going to care more about your finances than you, right? I mean, we love the families that we work with. We're so blessed to work with such great people. They're so respectful of us, our families. They care about us and our families. But the reality is no one's going to care about your finances more than you. And so the more that you can educate yourself and never feel as if there's bad questions, right? Jeff and I, early on in our partnership, we always try to position ourselves as saying, hey, we're not here to dictate how to handle your finances. We're here to help you educate yourself so you can make the best decisions for yourself ultimately, right? That's what we see our role is. We're just educators. We're not going to be the end-all, be-all experts on everything, but we're just educators to ultimately put you in a position that you're confident in the decisions you're making. And it comes back to that basic question of, am I going to be okay? You should always be able to answer that question confidently.
And that's when you know that you're on in the right vision of your plan when you are feeling comfortable. And 100%. You do that by becoming confident in the information. As I mentioned, I went to a workshop yesterday. There wasn't a lot new, but there were a few little ideas, like the notion of I didn't realize that the tax rates were going to go up in a couple of years, and I need to think about that. There's always more information out there, and taking advantage of that.
Yeah, I spend just countless hours reading all the time, and there's after doing this for 20 some years and reading nonstop, I'm still learning something every day, right? And I think that says a lot to what folks should think about. They don't need to become experts. Hopefully you're partnering with someone that can help you through that, but being educated so you can be a part of the process and you're not completely passive in it, I think is important.
Right. Listeners, we always talk about having resources available for you, and we will do that again. Ben's going to help us put a few ideas together. And just as an example, the workshop I went to yesterday was a free opportunity at my local library. There's lots of information out there that you can easily grab, and so we will provide that information in our show notes.
All right. Well, many thanks to our expert, Ben Hoeger, Director for Private Wealth Management, Robert W. Baird & Company, for joining us today. Listeners, thank you for joining us, and don't forget to check out our show notes on the website for contact information and, as we mentioned, the resources that we've discussed today. You can find the information at lookingforwardourway.com, and we're looking forward to hearing your feedback on this or any of our other podcast episodes.